Now, a UN-backed monitor has in the last hour said that the worst-case scenario of famine is playing out in the Gaza Strip. Whilst not being an official declaration of famine, the Integrated Food Security Phase classification says there is mounting evidence of widespread starvation, malnutrition and disease, and it's driving a rise in hunger-related deaths. It says the threshold for famine has been reached in Gaza City. In the past hour, the Israeli Foreign Minister described the situation in Gaza as tough, but said lies were being told about starvation. Gideon Saar said more than 5,000 aid trucks have entered Gaza in the past 2 months. Humanitarian groups, though, warn this week is crucial if thousands of people in Gaza are to be saved from starvation. They've urged Israel to open all border crossings and set up alternative routes for convoys. Here in the UK, a rare summer recess cabinet meeting is going to be held so the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, can update his ministers on the crisis. Well, I spoke to our Middle East correspondent Yolande Knell and Gaza correspondent Rushdie Abou-Alouf, who told me how much aid is getting into the Strip.
Well, nothing today. They're still waiting for the aid to come in today. Yesterday and the day before, the estimated is about 150 trucks, and this is very little comparing to what is needed in Gaza. Israel allowed food from 3 different crossings yesterday and the day before to reach like the 3 areas where Israel announced the tactical humanitarian pause. So they will allow food from the north and from the south in Rafah, and from Kusufim in the middle, so to cover the whole area. But the problem is that according to many Gazans, which I spoke to this morning and last night, most of the, like 90% of the trucks were looted by gangs and end up sold for a very high price in the black market. So the people who need this aid did not receive it.
And Yolande, what can you tell us about the different options that are being discussed, the calls for new routes to be opened?
Yeah, so we have had the UN saying that already there is in this region enough food to feed the more than 2 million people in the Gaza Strip for something like 3 months, if they can just shift those supplies into Gaza. And so what they're calling for is all of the border crossings of Gaza to be opened and for more safe routes for their convoys to be able to distribute that aid, to pick it up from the crossings with Israel and take it to the people who desperately need it in the Strip. Of course, what we have had in the past couple of days and again today is the Israeli military saying that it allows a 10-hour pause in its military operations in 3 parts of the Gaza Strip in order for that aid to be distributed. It said it's opening up new humanitarian corridors, but there have been questions asked by the aid agencies about where exactly those are. They say that a lot more needs to be done on the ground. We've had different agencies talking about how, you know, a lot of the headlines that have come through have talked about sort of token moves. It's been symbolic, but it's not action.
So far, it's a grim picture: border crossings blocked, aids trickling in, and confusion on the ground. What's coming next? A deeper dive into why the UN says this isn't technically famine yet. Buckle up. It's about to get more complex.
Important to say as well that we have had just a short time ago what we were waiting for, an alert from the IPC. That's the group of more than 20 aid organisations that you were referring to before. It's saying that it has not made an official formal classification of famine in Gaza, but at the same time it says famine is playing out in the Gaza Strip, and says that this was the worst case scenario. Mounting evidence shows that widespread starvation, malnutrition and disease are driving a rise in hunger-related deaths. We have had, you know, the different aid organisations that are part of this system warning in the past few days that actually it's very hard to meet the technical definition of famine. It's something that requires the gathering of lots of scientific data, but it's been difficult to do that because so many people in Gaza are displaced. They can't do the surveys that they need to do of households, and they can't do the screening that they need to do of children in particular to gather the evidence of the extent of malnutrition.
Yes, and Yolande, just picking up on that, from what we're seeing reported by the news agencies from the IPC. This alert now is saying famine is playing out in the Gaza Strip. But it doesn't formally classify Gaza as being in famine because they say that can only happen with more analysis, and it says that it will now carry that out without delay. Can you just give us a sense of even this announcement today from them? Does that make any difference on the ground to what happens? Yolande?
I mean, just to go into a bit of explanation, it's very technical for this designation of famine to be issued. What's required are three elements. So you need at least 1/5 of households having extreme lack.
Here's the hard legal truth. To officially declare famine, you need cold. Clinical data: 1 in 5 families starving, 30% of children severely malnourished, and at least 2 deaths per 10,000 people per day. But if people can't even be surveyed, how do you get that data? This is bureaucracy versus brutal reality.
Lack of food or starvation. You need to have more than 30% of children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition, and more than 2 in every 10,000 people in the population dying per day. Now, it's very hard with the figures that we're getting through to accurately assess exactly what is going on, to verify data to that extent. But of course, all of this is going to seem like, a lot of nonsense to people on the ground who are just suffering daily from the real effects of being unable to feed themselves, to feed their children. That's something that we hear in very stark terms from the freelance journalists who are working with us, who say that they're often going without even one meal a day, that their children are crying from hunger.
Yeah, and David Miliband, head of the International Rescue Committee, had said in a statement ahead of this alert that often the declaration of famine, formal famine declarations, he says, always lag reality. And he points to what happened in Somalia back in 2011. He said where 250,000 people, half of them children under 5, had already died of hunger. And he says by the time famine is declared, it'll already be too late. Rushdie, from what you are hearing, I imagine the problem is that because people have been struggling for food for so long, and children often are the most vulnerable, that the tipping points that we have seen reached with awful pictures and stories coming out in the last few days then become more acute. And so people are extremely vulnerable now, even though some aid is starting to go in.
Well, the people are frustrated, and no matter what they call it, famine or starvation or a shortage of food, everyone we spoke to for the last 3 months, that he is hungry. I spoke to a father this morning in Khan Yunis. He said that he didn't eat and his kids, his 5 children didn't eat for 2 days. The people want this to be, solved. The problem of the starvation is to be solved. They were hoped the beginning of this humanitarian pause that hundreds of trucks carrying food and aid will be allowed. But what is being allowed is very little. They call it a drop in the ocean. Back in January, when there was a ceasefire in place, we have seen a very speed progress in the humanitarian situation when Israel used to allow 500 to 600 trucks every day. And what is needed now, according to the UN and other agencies in Gaza, is about 500 to 600 trucks a day for at least a month. Talking to people across Gaza, north, middle, south, they are all saying that they are hungry, they are not eating enough food for a very long time. Also, we should not forget that 54% of the people in Gaza are below the age of 18. So that means half of the population, over 1 million people, are classified as children, and those are, need for food. There is the people are dying in the hospitals every day from the level of hunger. Hospitals also struggle from the, lack of medicine and lack of medical equipment.
Rushdie Abu Aluf and Yolande now speaking to me earlier.